Ever seen a man throw away his own wife and unborn child, all for a side chick? Jalen Whitaker was supposed to be a man of God. A leader. A husband. A soon-to-be father. But none of that mattered when his pregnant wife did the one thing he couldn't forgive: she embarrassed him. Not just in private. Not just in front of a few people. She humiliated him publicly. Loudly. And worst of all, she made it go viral. One explosive scene at a restaurant, a phone camera rolling, and within hours, his name was being laughed about all over town. His church board was calling. His congregation was whispering. His side chick was pissed. And Jalen? He was boiling. Tamara had to pay. Not with an apology. Not with a divorce. With her life. And when it came time to choose between the woman carrying his child and the mistress he ruined everything for, he picked up the hammer. What happens when a man of God lets his ego turn him into a killer? Jalen Whitaker thought he could control everything. His marriage. His secrets. His reputation. But when his wife took that control away, he didn't pray. He didn't repent. He made sure she would never get the last word. Welcome to Everyday True Crime, where we uncover the most twisted and jaw-dropping true crime cases. If you love dark, shocking crime stories, hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Now, let's get into this disturbing case that shook Florida to its core. Jalen Whitaker was a man who knew how to put on a show. At 42 years old, he was everything a pastor was supposed to be: charming, powerful, and respected. His sermons could bring a congregation to its feet. His words made people believe in love, faith, and loyalty. But behind closed doors, Jalen was living a lie. He was a man of God on Sunday. A husband on paper. But in secret, he was nothing more than a cheater, a manipulator, and a man who thought he could have it all. The affair had started as a thrill. A flirtation that turned into something more. She was younger. Exciting. Someone who fed his ego in a way his marriage couldn't. And Jalen? He wasn't about to stop. At first, he had been careful. The late-night prayer meetings. The out-of-town church conferences. The sneaky phone calls, always answered just out of his wife's earshot. But the more he got away with it, the more reckless he became. He thought no one would ever catch him. He thought wrong. Tamara Whitaker had built her entire world around her husband. At 34 years old, she had spent over a decade standing by his side. She believed in him. Defended him. She helped build his ministry from the ground up. And now? She was 7 months pregnant. Their first child. A blessing she had prayed for. A future she thought they would share together. She never imagined she would be raising this baby alone. For years, she had trusted Jalen without question. But something had changed. The phone calls late at night. The way he flinched when she asked who was calling. The smell of perfume that wasn't hers. Jalen had always been good at talking his way out of things. A smooth liar. A master at deception. But Tamara wasn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. She just didn't have proof. Not yet. Jalen's affair started as a game. A few stolen glances. A few flirtatious texts. It was harmless, or so he told himself. Until it wasn't. The thrill turned into something more. Something dangerous. Something that he never thought would come back to destroy him. He used his position to cover his tracks. Church events became his excuse to disappear. Late-night prayers became secret meetings filled with lies and betrayal. And Tamara? She saw everything. She didn't say a word. Not at first. She waited. Watched. Until the moment Jalen slipped up. Until the moment she finally caught him in the act. And from that second on, his life would never be the same. Tamara never wanted to be that woman. The woman who checked her husband's phone. The woman who had to search for proof of what she already knew in her gut. But here she was. Jalen was in the shower when his phone lit up. A message. She wasn't going to check it. She told herself she wouldn't. But then she saw it. A name she didn't recognize. A time. A place. A meeting. Her hands were shaking as she took a screenshot. Her mind racing as she read the words over and over. He was cheating. And now. She had proof. She could have confronted him right there. Screamed at him. Begged for the truth. But no. Jalen had spent years lying to her face. Now, she wanted to see it with her own eyes. The restaurant was packed. Laughter. Clinking glasses. The smell of grilled steak and expensive wine. Tamara sat in the corner, heart pounding, eyes locked on the entrance. Waiting. Then, there he was. Jalen Whitaker. Her husband. The father of her unborn child. The same man who stood on a pulpit every Sunday, preaching about honesty, loyalty, and faithfulness. And right beside him. Her husband. The father of her unborn child. The same man who stood on a pulpit every Sunday, preaching about honesty, loyalty, and faithfulness. And right beside him. Sarah Green. His mistress. Tamara's blood ran hot. She had pictured this woman 100 times in her head, but she wasn't prepared for this. Sarah walked in like she owned the place. Laughing. Tossing her hair. Acting like she had done nothing wrong. She wasn't even ashamed. And that? That sent Tamara over the edge. Before she could even stop herself, she stood up. Sarah Green, you low-budget, home-wrecking tramp. Heads turned. The entire restaurant fell silent. Sarah froze, blinking like a deer in headlights. Tamara didn't care. You think you're special? You think you're cute? Let me tell you something, sweetheart, he's not with you because you're better. He's with you because you're easy. More gasps. Jalen reached for her. Tamara, shut up. She turned back to Sarah. You're nothing but a side dish. A cheap, disposable, Walmart version of a real woman. And you had the nerve to think you could compete with me? Sarah's face turned red. People were whispering. Laughing. Tamara stepped closer, pointing a sharp fingernail at her. I hope you enjoy the attention now, because once he's done with you, you'll be just another name in his phone. Cameras were already rolling. Phones out. People eating up every second. Sarah tried to speak, Tamara cut her off. What? You thought he was gonna leave me for you? My husband. The father of my child. Oh, honey, you were just a little fun on the side. He probably doesn't even like you that much. Laughter. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Her eyes filled with tears. Jalen hissed under his breath. Tamara, stop it. Tamara laughed. Why? You embarrassed? Good. Maybe next time, you'll keep your hands off another woman's husband. Sarah grabbed her purse and ran out. Tamara turned to Jalen. Oh, you're not gonna run after her? His face was burning. Everyone in the restaurant was staring. Tamara grabbed her phone, holding it high. Y'all wanna see a hypocrite? Say hi to the internet, Jalen. The video spread like wildfire. Within minutes, it was on social media. Within hours, it had thousands of views. By morning, it was everywhere. People commented. People shared. People laughed. Pastor Jalen got caught slippin', man of God. LMAO, karma is a woman named Tamara. Jalen's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Church members. His family. The church board. Everyone had seen it. His entire reputation was in flames. And the worst part? Tamara wasn't finished. She sat across from him that night, staring him down. "You think that was bad?" she whispered. Jalen barely looked at her. "Tamara," she slid an envelope across the table. He opened it. Bank statements. Withdrawals. Expensive dinners. Hotel stays. Church money. Tamara smiled. "If you don't confess," she whispered, "I'll show them everything." Jalen gripped the papers, hands trembling. His heart pounded. His face burned with rage. She had ruined him. Humiliated him. Destroyed everything he had built. And in that moment, something inside him snapped. Jalen Whitaker had spent years crafting the perfect image. A devoted pastor. A loving husband. A leader of his community. And in one night, Tamara tore it all apart. The video was everywhere. His name was being mocked, his reputation dragged through the mud. His congregation was calling, questioning, judging. And worst of all, Sarah Green, his precious mistress, was furious. She had been humiliated, turned into a laughingstock. She blamed him for letting it happen. "You should have controlled your wife," she hissed over the phone. "You let her do this to me. To us." Jalen gritted his teeth. Controlled his wife. Tamara was uncontrollable. And she wasn't done. That night, she sat across from him, smiling. "You know, people are still watching that video," she taunted. "Over 1 million views. They think you're pathetic." Jalen's jaw clenched. She wasn't just happy, she was enjoying this. "You wanted to play in the dirt, Jalen," she whispered. "Now you're rolling in it." He couldn't take it. The stares. The whispers. The texts. The shame. He had built this life. This church. This power. And she destroyed it all. He went to bed that night, but he didn't sleep. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, seething. Tamara thought she won. She thought she had the upper hand. She had no idea what he was about to do. The house was silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. Jalen sat at the edge of the bed, staring at his wife. She was sitting up, scrolling through her phone. Her hand rested on her belly. His child. Their child. His future. And yet, he felt nothing. Not love. Not remorse. Not guilt. Only rage. His breathing grew heavy. His fingers twitched. Tamara sighed and leaned back against the headboard. She dialed a number. Her sister, Keisha Daniels, picked up. "Hey girl," Tamara said casually. They talked for a few minutes, laughing about something from earlier that day. Then Keisha said, "Hold on, I need to go grab something." She set her phone down, waiting. Neither of them pressed hold. The call was still connected. But in that moment, they were just silent, both waiting for the other to return. And that's when Jalen moved. Slow. Deliberate. Silent. He walked to the garage. His hands reached for something cold. The hammer. He gripped it tight, feeling the weight in his hands. It felt right. He walked back to the bedroom. Tamara was still sitting there, unaware. His heart pounded, his fingers tightened around the hammer. He stood behind her. And in a voice laced with venom, he whispered, "You should have stayed quiet." Tamara barely had time to turn. Crack. The first blow shattered her skull. She let out a choked, gurgled scream. Her body jerked violently. Her phone slid from her lap onto the bed. And miles away, Keisha's voice echoed through the speaker, "Tamara." What was that? Tamara twitched, gasping for air. But Jalen wasn't done. He swung again. Crack. Blood sprayed across the pillows, the sheets, the walls. Keisha screamed into the phone. "Tamara. Tamara, what's happening? Talk to me." Jalen froze. His head snapped toward the nightstand. The phone was still connected. His eyes widened in horror. He could hear Keisha panicking. "Somebody tell me what's happening," she cried. Then Jalen heard something even worse. A faint beep. A recording. Keisha had been recording the call from the moment she heard screams. Jalen's blood ran cold. And in that moment, he knew, it was over. Keisha hung up and immediately dialed 911. "My sister, she's in trouble. I think," she choked on her words. "I think she's being attacked." The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Where is she located?" She could barely get the address out through her sobs. Then she sent the recording. And within minutes, the police were on their way. Jalen was still in the house, standing over his wife's lifeless body. His hands were shaking. His clothes were soaked in blood. His mistress. His church. His reputation. It was all gone. He needed to run. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, anything he could carry. And then, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The sound of sirens pierced the night. Jalen's breath caught in his throat. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker. "Step out with your hands in the air." He bolted for the back door, but it was too late. A flood of officers rushed inside. Jalen didn't even fight. He knew it was over. They tackled him to the ground. Blood was still dripping from his hands as they cuffed him. As they dragged him out, one officer spoke into his radio. "Victim is deceased. 7 months pregnant." Jalen squeezed his eyes shut. It wasn't supposed to end like this. But it did. And the whole world would know. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled, every eye locked on one man. Jalen Whitaker. The once revered pastor. The so-called man of God. Now nothing more than a murderer in an orange jumpsuit. He sat at the defendant's table, his hands cuffed, his face hollow. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the charisma. All that remained was a broken man. Across the room, Tamara's family sat in silence. Her mother clutched a tissue, eyes red from weeks of crying. Her father's fists were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. And at the very front, Keisha. The woman who had heard it all. The screams. The blows. The sickening sound of her sister's skull shattering. And now, she would hear justice being served. The prosecutor stood, stepping toward the jury. "This was not a crime of passion," he began, his voice sharp as a knife. "This was cold-blooded murder." He turned to Jalen, his expression disgusted. This man didn't snap in the heat of an argument. He didn't act out of impulse. He planned this. He took a deep breath before delivering the words that sealed Jalen's fate. "And we have proof. The recording. The damning evidence that Tamara never meant to capture, but did." The prosecutor pressed play. The courtroom fell silent. Then, Tamara's voice filled the air. Light-hearted. Relaxed. Talking to her sister like it was any other night. Then, Jalen's voice. "You should have stayed quiet." Then came the first sickening crack. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone sobbed. Keisha stared at Jalen, unblinking. Tamara's final scream echoed through the speakers. And then, Jalen's voice again. Cold. Emotionless. "This is your fault." Keisha's hands curled into fists. Tears burned her eyes, but she wouldn't look away. She wanted him to see her. She wanted him to know, she would never forgive him. Jalen's attorney tried to fight back. Mr. Whitaker was under extreme emotional distress, he argued. This was not premeditated. He simply lost control. He turned to the jury, forcing a sympathetic tone. His life was crumbling. His marriage was in shambles. His reputation, gone. The video humiliated him beyond repair. Jalen nodded along. Yes. That was the story. He wasn't a monster. He was pushed. He was provoked. He was the real victim. But then the prosecutor stepped forward. You're telling me, he said slowly, his voice dripping with disbelief, that the real victim in this case is the man who bludgeoned his pregnant wife to death. Jalen tensed. The prosecutor turned to the jury, letting his words sink in. Tamara Whitaker was 7 months pregnant. His voice was ice. She was lying in her own bed. He gestured toward Jalen. And this man, her husband, the father of her unborn child, stood behind her and chose to pick up a hammer. His voice rose. He whispered to her before he attacked. He turned back to the jury, his expression pure fury. Does that sound like someone who just lost control? Jalen's attorney shifted uncomfortably. The jury didn't look convinced. Jalen felt it. The weight of his mistakes. The inevitability of his fate. He tried to straighten his posture. To look strong. But his hands wouldn't stop shaking. The trial dragged on for weeks. Witness after witness took the stand. Tamara's parents spoke of her kindness. Her church members spoke of her devotion to Jalen. And Sarah Green, Jalen's precious mistress, never even showed up. She had cut ties with him the moment he was arrested. She had moved on. She wasn't the one on trial. Jalen was. And he was running out of time. The jury took only 3 hours to decide his fate. When they returned, the judge asked the question that would determine the rest of Jalen's life. Has the jury reached a verdict? A woman in the front row stood. Yes, Your Honor. She cleared her throat. We, the jury, find the defendant, Jalen Whitaker. A pause. A heavy silence. Jalen held his breath. Guilty. A sob broke out from Tamara's mother. Keisha squeezed her eyes shut, letting out a shaky breath. Jalen didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't breathe. Then the judge's voice rang out, Jalen Whitaker, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Keisha exhaled, tears slipping down her cheeks. It wouldn't bring Tamara back. It wouldn't bring back the baby she would never get to meet. But it was justice. Jalen's shoulders sagged. It was over. His world had crumbled to dust. No more church. No more power. No more Sarah. Nothing. The guards grabbed his arms, pulling him to his feet. His shackles clinked against the floor. And for the first time since the trial started, he turned. He locked eyes with Keisha. She stared back. Unforgiving. Unshaken. Unmoved. The guards pulled him away. And as he disappeared through the courtroom doors, Keisha whispered. Rot in hell. Jalen Whitaker spent years building his image. A devoted husband. A respected pastor. A man of God. But beneath the sermons and the scripture was a man driven by ego, deception, and control. He thought he had everything figured out. He thought he could have his wife and his mistress. His church and his sins. His power and his secrets. But secrets don't stay buried forever. Tamara found out. And worse, she made sure everyone else did too. Jalen wasn't prepared for the humiliation. The whispers. The judgment. The video that turned him into a public disgrace overnight. Instead of repenting, instead of facing his sins, he chose silence. Permanent silence. But what he never expected was that even in death, Tamara would still be heard. She had recorded everything. Her sister had heard everything. The world knew the truth. And now, the man who once stood in the pulpit preaching about righteousness, was rotting in a prison cell, condemned as nothing more than a murderer. What do you think? Was this a crime of uncontrollable rage, or was Jalen Whitaker always a wolf in sheep's clothing? Let us know in the comments. If you love dark and twisted true crime stories, subscribe to Everyday True Crime. Hit that like button, turn on notifications, and we'll see you in the next case.